Right, you found them, did you? Good. Is it anything I need to worry about, or can you deal with it? 3 teenagers, a Ouija board, a Black Sabbath album, and a broken pickle jar. You think the Milwaukee Family Players scared them half to death anyway. Okay, well, you go finish the job and make that be a lesson to people not to go messing about with stuff they don't understand, okay? Good. Hello? Hello? So, we're back. We finally worked out what happened to the Milwaukee Family Players. Apparently it was an accident. An accident. That's what they say. That's what they say. But anyway, all's well that ends well. Well, it won't end well for them. At least it wasn't like Crowley. Oh my goodness, he was a pain. Kept letting things out that he had no bother dealing with, and then he didn't know how to put things back together. You know how much trouble it was to get that thing back down here after he let it out in the house? It took until they demolished the house to get it back down. Seriously, don't go messing with things you don't understand. Otherwise my husband will have to put on pants and shoes and go upstairs and topside and deal with you, and you do not want that. Anyway, we're not here to discuss messing with occult things. We are here to discuss Henry VI Part 3 and the new book that is out. And that is here, and it is for teachers, and it will help you with your Shakespeare, and it has better plays than the one we're currently going to do. Oops, spoilers. Though this one actually is the best of the 3 that we're doing at the moment. So, anyway, so we're on to Henry VI Part 3. And having just lost the battle at the end of the last play, as I said, the last play really feels like a donut, and Henry VI is the whole, because he's so weak. I mean, Richard was weak, but Richard was narcissistic and silly and egotistical and self-pitying and funny and a lot of things that actually made you a lot more engaged with him. Henry just, it's hard to believe he's Hal's son. It really is hard to believe he's Hal's son. But in this play we get 2 great characters, Richard III and Queen Margaret. And they're really the driving force behind the whole play, because if the whole thing happened with just Henry, this thing doesn't last long. This thing doesn't get out of Act 1. So, as we start, we open with Richard Duke of York, because there are 2 Richards. This play was originally called Richard Duke of York, and obviously you can't call it that when you're putting it together with Richard III, because they're 2 different Richards. And that gets a bit confusing in the book. I don't know why it gets confusing, but anyway. Because he was never Duke of York, he was Duke of Gloucester, and then he became king. But this one's Duke of York. And that Henry VI Part 2 was actually called the First Part of Contention. But they changed that, because they added a prequel, you know. And you want to have the whole trilogy look the same. Anyway, where was I? Richard Duke of York is now sitting on the throne of England and having won the Battle of St. Albans. This has a lot of battles in it. And again, Shakespeare hadn't worked out you do not necessarily need to be true to the history. You can be true to the feel of it without necessarily depicting every single battle, because it does get really tiresome. I know it's a big Civil War-y thing, but it does actually get tiresome, and the battles are at the expense of character development, which is a shame, because this, like the last one, could really do with character development. This does have Richard and Margaret, and Richard and Margaret are Margaret is a great through line of the 4 plays, because she's hanging about in Richard III still. And Richard is certainly intimidated by Margaret. He's certainly, all of them are certainly scared of her in a way that they're not really scared of anyone else. So they have now taken the throne and forced Henry to concede to make the Duke of York his heir and disinherit his son. When Margaret hears of this, she is like, how dare you? How dare you disinherit our son for this Duke of York? How dare you give up without a fight? You coward. She doesn't actually say coward, but that's what she means. And she is supported by young Clifford, and she is supported by other lords in, no, we are not going to just give up the crown to this upstart. So she's pissed. He's now pissed off his wife, but all he has been thinking of is how can we do this without any more bloodshed, because he's got the same problem that he had in the last one. He's too pious. He wants everything to just go nicely, and it's not going to go nicely. Your kingdom is under attack. You are supposedly God's anointed one, and you're not defending your kingdom. Dude, priorities. So having got this word out of the king that he will give up his throne, the Duke of York's 3 sons, Edward, George, and Richard, we know these. We met George briefly before he was killed. We met Edward briefly before he died. And we met Richard when he had his own play. But Edward, George, and Richard, and there is also a 4th son who's called Rutland, but don't get attached to him. Don't get attached to him. They dispute that with their father, and it's like, look, father, this king could live for goodness knows how long. That oath, that wasn't a properly binding oath. Take the crown. Take the crown. Take the crown, take the crown, take the crown. Because, if he leaves this too long, there'll be some wrangling out of this thing. They don't really trust this oath. And they're right not to trust it, because guess who's coming with 20,000 men? Margaret, the real hero of this play. The real tragic hero of this play. Margaret is coming with Clifford and others, and she is marching on them. They march on York. In the battle, Clifford captures Rutland and kills him in revenge for his father's death. York describes his son's prowess in the battlefield, these great lions of warriors, but ends up taken himself by Clifford and others and Queen Margaret. And Queen Margaret taunts him with the death of his son Rutland, taunts him with his defeat and the death of his son Rutland before she lets Clifford kill him. And this is where we get the great line, "A woman's heart wrapped in a tiger's hide," which was used by Robert Greene in his Upstart Crow. Tiger's heart wrapped in a player's hide. So he paraphrases Shakespeare in that. As sort of how we know he's talking about Shakespeare. Anyway, so this is a big defeat. York's head is put on a pike and carried back to London as like, this is what happens to traitors. Don't think that we're going to just roll over and let you have it. So Edward, George, and Richard are wondering what's happened to their father in the aftermath of the battle. They don't know yet that he's been killed. When they hear that he has been killed, they decide that they're going to continue the fight for the throne for Edward. So Edward they're going to continue this fight so that Edward can be king now. So there is no letting up of this rebellion. They are absolutely implacable. When Queen Margaret returns in victory with the head of York on a pike, Henry is absolutely dismayed. He's overwhelmed by this because Henry is, frankly, just not equipped to be king. Lord Clifford is upset that the king is being so cowardly and weak. Richard and Edward and George and Warwick enter and claim the kingship for themselves because the parley was broken by Margaret attacking them. The whole thing just descends into chaos. And then we get another battle. There's a lot of these battles. I mean, they're used to kill people off, but we don't get a lot of sense of a lot of these characters who are killed, so it's really hard to remember them. Because, like, Clifford, okay, he's pretty brutal and he's angry that his father was killed, but we don't have any sense of him in the same way that we have, like, say, a sense of Cassius. So it's again, it's got the same sort of problems as the previous play of a lot happening, but are not that. So you've got this really forward-moving plot, but not a lot of character definition out of most of the characters. So it becomes a little, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. So you're following the history, but you're not getting a lot of real narrative depth. And that's sort of a problem with these early plays. These things get fixed up a lot more by Richard III. They're really fixed up by the time you get to Richard II and the Henria. They're brilliant. They're fixed up in, but they're definitely a young writer experimenting and trying out. The idea that you just have like a million battle scenes and that makes your movie or your play really entertaining is sort of a fallacy that people still haven't learned. Shakespeare learned it. That's why you get those big battle scenes become really key, but there's just battle after battle after battle, and things go backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. It becomes a little frustrating in that regard. So I'll try to get through this as easily as possible, but we get a bit confused at times. There's another battle, and Clifford is killed, and his body is insulted by the sons of York. Henry ends up in the battle sort of not actually fighting. He's not a warrior king. There is a really brilliant part which is very particularly Shakespeare, and it has a father has killed his son because they're on opposite sides of the war, not ideologically, just because one got press-ganged into this army and one got press-ganged into that army. And the father has killed his son, which he only discovers after he has killed this man and is now going through his pockets for gold. And he looks at his face and realizes this is his son. And he laments killing his son. And then there is another man who is a son who is in the same position, but he has killed his father. And this is like, obviously a metaphor for the country tearing itself apart, that this is this family of people fighting against each other. So it's a really nice metaphor in the middle of this battle, but it doesn't progress things particularly, and it doesn't, although it shows that Henry's enormous compassion and that he's overwhelmed by this, it still doesn't push it forward in the way that you would really kind of want it to. So although they've got these brilliant pieces, the Death of York is a brilliant piece, that piece with the fathers and sons is a brilliant piece, but there's so much happening that it's very hard to focus on these pieces or have these pieces have, like, they sit there and then it just moves on, and it's like, oh, do these deserve more, or should we have expanded more around this? So there's lots of ideas in it, but none of them are developed as fully as they might be later on in later plays. This is sort of the problem with these plays. Edward wins the battle. The king has fled. Margaret and the Prince of Wales have gone into exile in France. And Warwick is now is ready to crown or give, put his support and put the support of the country behind Edward being king. So Edward is now king, and in order to legitimize this, Warwick is going to go to France to negotiate the marriage between Edward and the King of France's sister. So this actually is important for the remainder of the play. Henry had fled to Scotland, but has now returned to England incognito. Not really a bright idea, because he's pretty quickly captured and put into the Tower, which more or less negates him, puts him out of the way for a great deal more of the play. Now that Edward is king, he is visited by a Lady Grey, the Lady Elizabeth Grey. She is a widow with sons, and she wants her husband's land back for her sons. And she might be a widow, she might be a little bit older, but Edward looks at her and thinks, woof! And he decides he is going to marry her. Now, Richard and George don't think this is a great idea. George especially doesn't think this is a great idea, especially since Warwick has just been is in France at this moment to negotiate a far more advantageous marriage than this begging widow. But Edward will hear none of it. He wants the widow. George goes over to the other side. He betrays his family. He goes over to Henry's side. Richard is like, now that his brother is king, he's now looking at, well, how do I turn this to my advantage so I become king? So Richard has been playing a long game of chess here. He's been playing a much longer game. He's been quite willing to walk over everybody. So Richard has now suddenly turned from loyal brother, because he is loyal brother, and this also is sort of a bit of an issue with the play, because it's just all of a sudden he's a villain. He doesn't undermine yet, but he is definitely working on, I'm going to secure this throne for my brother, and then I'm going to get it myself. So he's starting to go down this other road, and making it very clear that he's not to be trusted. Stupid Edward. Anyway, in France, Queen Margaret is complaining to the king, how can you be opening negotiations with our enemy and be a friend of me? Warwick is there to say, are you willing to marry your sister off to our new king? And the king is amenable to this. However, a messenger, as they're negotiating this, comes in and says that Edward has married the Lady Grey. Warwick feels absolutely betrayed, because he has been doing this and he has not been consulted, and this has just been done unilaterally, and he is, oh, you bastard, and he instantly pledges all of his support to Margaret. The King of France is also deeply insulted that his sister has been rejected for some nothing, and he too pledges his forces to Margaret and reclaiming the crown for Henry and her son. Margaret now comes. Margaret says, I will put armour on. I will put armour on again. So she is coming again at the head of an invading army to take back the crown with French backing. So, Edward and the Lady Grey are forced to flee as this army sweeps in and liberates Henry for a little while. Henry is liberated. There is Edward is going to plan an attack. Then there's a bit that really doesn't make proper sense, except that it's Tudor propaganda, because Henry then meets a young Richmond who will become Henry the Seventh, who's the Tudor ancestor, and sort of gives a blessing as such of, this boy will be important, as if his own son shouldn't be important. So that's a bit that, like, you could kill that and it wouldn't really affect the play. It's just purely there for Tudor propaganda, because clearly they're feeling terribly unsettled about their claim to the throne itself, because their claim is probably less than, certainly less than Richard's. Their claim to the throne is certainly less than Richard's, and is certainly less than Henry VI. So, yeah, that's definitely in there for propaganda purposes. So Warwick engages Edward at York. Warwick also has George with him, George Clarence, and George is persuaded by his brothers to come back over. Come on, George, come back to us, George. And George, in spite of having now married Warwick's daughter, switches sides. They then fight Warwick's troops. Warwick dies, and then we get another battle. It's just battle after battle after battle, and that is sort of a bit of a problem with this play. So Edward is now will engage with Margaret. King Henry is recaptured. Edward engages battle with Margaret. It goes badly for Margaret's side. They lose. Henry has been imprisoned. Again, he's not actually that worried about this, because, he's really a weak king. Margaret is the one who's got any mettle to her, and her son. So she and her son have been fighting. Edward, George, and Richard kill her son after they've been captured, and Margaret begs for them to kill her too, but they won't. They won't kill Margaret. Richard, in the middle of this, says, I have somewhere to go, and pisses off to the Tower, where he goes and he kills Henry. And that's pretty much it. They win the Battle of they've won the Battle of Tewkesbury. They've killed the heir. They've killed the king. They've left Margaret. She can go off into banishment. And now we have the throne. We have won the War of the Roses. That's pretty much it. Richard is like, okay, now that we've got all our external enemies killed and got rid of, now it's Richard's time to shine. I'm going to get this throne for myself. I don't care how many people are in between me and it. And so then we go into Richard III, which by that point, Richard III is the much, much better play. He's a much more experienced playwright by the time he's writing Richard III. So these plays are sort of the lesser tetralogy of plays compared to the Henriade. The Margaret Saga are the lesser plays. There are, when you watch them, you really see hints of where the writer will go, but he's not there yet. So they're kind of less satisfying. His ability to balance comedy and tragedy isn't as well developed yet. But those are the Henry VI plays. And I will see you again with another play in the future. Bye-bye.
If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books and other writing services to help with your writing.